Good morning, all. Good afternoon to y'all in Toronto. My name is Dan Waldevogel. I'm the membership coordinator with the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union. Happy to be here today, and welcome to the Colorado Grain Chain Homeschool webinar series. I believe this is number 13. Just a little bit of housekeeping, as always. The best way to ask questions is to use the Q&A function on Zoom. You can write questions in there at any time, and we'll try to get to all of them. If we don't get to them all, we'll try to get them answered after the webinar. I did receive some questions via email. I'll try to feed those over as well throughout the webinar. You can use the Zoom or the chat function. It just sometimes things get lost in there a little bit. So the best way to ask questions is through the Q&A. But welcome. Thank you for being here, everyone. I'll get right to it. I'm going to introduce Matthew James Duffy, according to your Instagram handle. Matthew, thank you for being here. Matthew is a baking professor and chef, writer, pizza fanatic. He's based in Toronto. And also, I found it kind of interesting, too, as a subscription-based service for baking bread from Ancient Grains, and subscribers get weekly deliveries to their door. I think that's also very interesting this day and age when we're rethinking food systems. So with that, Matthew, I will hand it over to you, and we'll get started right off the bat and provide as much time as possible for what you have to offer.
All right, so thank you so much, everyone that's joined. I had a lot of people reach out to me with some questions and whatnot. I hope that you can save them for here, because if you have that question, someone else has the same question. So just a little bit about myself. I'm currently the Baking and Pastry Arts Management Coordinator for the 2-year program at Centennial College. I'm the culinary director for Maker Pizza, which is a pizza place in Toronto. We've been voted best pizza by Toronto Life, as well as Blog TO and several other Toronto pizza publications. So for about 2 years running, we've held the #1 pizza title in Toronto, and I've worked very hard on the dough and helped them develop to what they are. They have a great product, and they brought me on the team as a consultant, and it's been going very well. And now I've joined the team, not in a full-time capacity, but in a larger capacity. As Dan mentioned, I run a small subscription-based micro bakery. I don't deliver to the doors, it's on pickup, but what I do is I send out a notification of, hey, this is what I'm baking. I keep it very small. It's mostly friends and family. I'm probably going to be adding a few people to that, so if anyone's interested, you can send me a message. I bake with Ancient Grains. I mill my own flour at the college or here. So I try to incorporate different breads. I typically do no less than 50% whole grains in my breads. And yeah, so that's a little bit about me. There's a bunch of other stuff in there. I worked at a bunch of Michelin restaurants, 5 years with Daniel Boulud, Italy, Japan, Spain, Denmark. I did a little stint at Noma. And I've really just sort of come to love bread and dough making. Even though I was cooking and handling a lot of other products, it's just sort of become part of my life and the food system. I have a beautiful wife and a 2-year-old daughter, and we sort of do these little fun videos. So if you're not following me, feel free to check me out on Instagram or other social handles. So what we're going to do today, and what I've sort of set up, is a very beginner sort of intro to pizza. In my opinion, you know, I'm really into pizza. I'm always trying to make the best dough. Typically, what I make is always naturally leavened, so I use a sourdough culture to make most of my pizzas. For today, we're going to be making the yeast-based dough because it reaches a broader audience and it's a little bit easier to manage when you first start out. What I suggest is you make this formula a few times, and then once you're ready to upgrade, you can make several changes. So I've got a recipe prepared that everyone's going to receive in a PDF format, and I've prepared it to be a very standard pizza recipe. So I'm not going to get too much into temperatures and times because this is a beginner workshop. But what I will say is the breakdown starts with 1,000 grams of flour. And the reason the recipe is scheduled like that is so that you, as the home baker or professional or whatever you are, you can scale accordingly. So baker's percentage is a very useful tool. But when the flour is 1,000 grams, everything comes in relation. So we're going to be making a dough today with 65% hydration. We've got olive oil, sugar, instant yeast, and sea salt. I did have someone ask me the question of, the sugar says optional, do I need it? So I'll answer that right now. Typically, I don't add any sugar to my pizza dough. I'm actually sort of in some ways against it. I don't think it's necessary. However, for a home pizza in a home oven, the sugar, you could also use a malted extract, is going to increase the fermentation a little bit. It's also, more importantly, going to help with the enzymatic browning of your dough. So in order to get those spots and that nice color that you want to see on a pizza dough, I recommend starting with the sugar. Now, that said, it's optional. If you want to leave it out, go ahead. There's also sea salt in here. I use a fine sea salt. I recommend sea salt. I know a lot of bakers recommend kosher salt. I prefer to use sea salt. I just try to find a very fine one. So if you see on my dough cam, I can hold this up and you can probably see, and we'll go over that. Just stay away from iodized salt. So just to break this down for you, good pizza requires time. There's no shortcut. So you can't make it fast. You can't make it in an hour. It just doesn't work like that. And yes, there's many dough recipes that are done in an hour. Yes, there's many dough recipes that are different. But in my opinion, the best doughs are made over a long period of time. I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of different bakers around the world. About a year ago, I was working with a German master baker in his bakery. And one thing I've noticed across all of these breads is that all these bakeries is all of the best breads that I've eaten in my life, all of the best pizzas require time and proper fermentation. So if we can do things really slowly over a longer period of time, we tend to get a better shelf life. We get a better digestibility. We get a better flavor as well, which is the key here. So with that said, in your recipe that you're going to receive, it's got a little bit of some small words you can use. It's got a link to a couple of things and some directions. So if you want to take notes, you can. One thing that I do recommend, this is a beginner class, so you will need a scale. Very important. And if you're serious about baking, this one costs about $30 on Amazon. This one's more expensive. What I am in the process of doing is I'm building a website that's going to launch in the next 10 to 12 days. And I'm going to have a resources section of what I prefer, this brand of scale. And I mean, I've tried 30 different ones. So if you hold off, you can sign up for that. You're also going to need a thermometer to get serious about baking. This is a cheaper one, digital. This is a more expensive one. It doesn't really matter. Just get one to start. And then I also recommend getting one of these eventually. Again, you don't need it right away. It's a point and shoot thermometer, infrared. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to start by mixing a dough. Then I'm going to show you how to shape a dough. I've already mixed one that I've had going so that we could see all processes of this development. And then we're going to cook some pizzas and we'll open it up some questions. So I'm going to take it here. Dan, do you think you could throw it on the dough cam for me so everyone can see in the bowl? Okay, so what is better? Okay, so what I'm going to do first, just to follow this up with the thing I said about time. Many recipes you will find online tell you to use warm water. Now, warm water will proof faster. The colder something is, the colder it rises. It is my opinion that it is always better to make pizza on the colder side of fermentation and do it slower. So I have some water that I weighed out, and I actually weighed this with ice so that it was ready to go. So my water is fairly chilled. I won't get into exact temperatures because, again, this is a beginner class. We're going to take our 2 grams of yeast, and we're going to put that in the bowl. If you wanted to change this recipe to sourdough, which I'm sure many of you will, you could start off with, I would say, 20 to 25% levain, or even better, you could just wait 2 weeks until I post my guides on my website. But I'm going to add the sugar, again, optional. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the flour, and I'm going to put the salt into the flour. So you can put the salt in the water. A lot of people will tell you this will kill the yeast, but I can tell you right now it will not. That's a myth that they teach you in school. If you're really concerned, what you can do is put some flour in the bowl like this, and that'll act as a buffer to the yeast. But watch, we're going to put this right in, and I promise you it won't kill anything. So next I'm going to add my flour here. And so there is another myth that goes around online that will tell you that New York City tap water makes the best pizza. I actually think it's Toronto water. So if anyone wants, you know, I'll be shipping out Toronto water across the world for your pizzas. No, I'm just kidding. What I would suggest is use a filtered water and just let it sit out overnight. So either 2 hours. City water is chlorinated or has chloramine, so I typically filter it or I'll let it sit out for a few hours. So once all the ingredients are in the bowl, you're gonna use your hand like a claw. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring it over and I'm gonna pinch through it. Now what that does is I'm gonna expose more surface area and I'm gonna expose the wet parts of the dough so that we can start to absorb the dry bits. And I'm actually gonna stand up because I'm sitting down and it's kind of hard to work sitting down. And I'm just gonna start to fold this over and pinch. You may feel when you start to do this that this is a little bit dry, but the recipe is a recipe for a reason. So what I encourage you to do when you start out is follow the recipe and don't add water. I always get the question at this point, oh, but chef, the dough is really sticky. What do I do? Should I add more flour? Do not add more flour. This is based on a ratio, a recipe, and the moment you start adding and changing ingredients, you'll change it. One thing I will say is with the recipe I've sent you, we'll answer some questions about flour later, but I just call for bread flour. In this bowl and the pizza dough that I've actually made, I'm using 20% spelt and about 20% dopo zero, which is a double zero. When you first start out, don't worry about all the fancy flours. If you want to use whole grains, I would suggest starting at around 20% and scaling from there. But don't buy into the hype online. Don't go buy a bag of Caputo Blue because that's what you saw in some YouTube video, because you really don't need it. And in my opinion, that flour is a very low quality flour, and I try not to consume it personally, and I try not to use it. No offense to Caputo, they make lots of great pizzas around the world. It's just not what I want to put in my body. So if you take a look at this, where are we? Oh. So it's pretty shaggy. It still sticks to my hand, makes quite a thud. We're just gonna keep working on it. So what'll happen is this is gonna start to come together, but now before it does, so if you can all see that, take your screenshot or whatever you wanna do. Before you bring this together, you're gonna wanna grab your oil, and we're gonna start to add the oil. The reason I add the oil now is because I wanna develop gluten before. You have two proteins. Once you start to add fat, you're gonna inhibit and slow down gluten development. So we wanna have this mix before we add the fat. You can also omit the fat if that's something you want. However, for a beginner pizza recipe, I always recommend it because it helps you stretch the dough and it becomes a little bit more forgiving. For my naturally leavened pizzas, I go back and forth. Some days I use it, some days I don't, but I always try to teach people to use the fat to start. So put a little bit in, give it a mix, and wait until that oil is absorbed before you add the rest of it, okay? Or else what you end up with is this like soupy mess in the bowl and it's sliding around, and then you send me an email and you say, Chef Duffy, the dough didn't work, what did I do? But typically that's one of the mistakes I always see is people want to add the fat right away. So now we're gonna add the rest of that, let it drip. I use olive oil because it's what I want to consume. You could use any oil you want. I know you guys are out in Colorado, so if you wanted to use your cannabis oil out there, you could. You could use coconut oil. You could use canola oil. I use olive oil because I like the flavor. It goes well with pizza. It's readily available, and it's not a cheap oil. I don't want to consume anything really cheap. A lot of pizzerias, little secret, will use a cheaper oil because of food costs, because you're literally going to save yourself hundreds of thousands of dollars if you use a cheaper oil or a lower quality. I don't use the finest extra virgin oil. I just use a nice table olive oil, and that sort of gets me through it. So you can see there's nothing in the bowl. That's really important. You shouldn't have bits of dough everywhere. You shouldn't have little bits of flour everywhere. Dough likes to stick to dough, so if you do, at this point, just take your hand and run it around the bowl, and you'll start to absorb that fat, or those bits of dough. I'm actually gonna flip this on the table now because it's easier. So what I'll do now, just move this out of the way. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna start to do a kneading process. So what I like to do is with the palm of my hand, I'm gonna bring the top down and press into the dough. Then I'm gonna turn it and repeat. So it kind of looks like this. So this hand is going to scoop the dough up and turn it, and this hand's going to press. And we're going to keep going. If you wanted to do this on a mixer, you could. I really recommend when you first start out making these doughs, you make them by hand. It's going to give you a better sense of feel. It's also very difficult to overmix this by hand, but it's very easy to overmix and oxidize it on the machine. So now you're going to see from a few minutes ago, I'm going to hold this up, and you're going to see how it's starting to come together, okay? Sorry. I'm new to the dough cam, so it wasn't right on point. And we're just going to knead this until it starts to become smooth, and then we're going to set it aside, and we're going to let that rest. So one thing I've also come to learn through traveling and through working in different bakeries and experimenting at home is gluten likes to relax. It likes to rest. The best breads that I've ever had tend to have a very long relaxation period. So what we're going to do is we're going to mix this until it starts to come smooth, and then we're going to let it relax. What that'll do is it'll allow that gluten chain to relax, and then when we start to knead it, it's going to come together very fast into a very smooth ball. Whereas if we keep kneading it like this, you're going to see it's got this tearing, and it doesn't look like a very rounded ball yet. So just keep going. Again, if you want to use your KitchenAid, great. Spiral mixer, even better. Diving arm, even better. Keep going, keep going. What you should notice at this point is the dough stands up. It doesn't slack on the table. That's a good sign that we're developing gluten and that things are moving in the right direction. If you notice your table is dirty, you can scrape it up, put it in a ball. So we're going to keep going, and we're having fun. You can skip the gym tonight. You just make pizza. Get your little arm workout in. Okay, so at this point, we have a nice ball. It's starting to come together really well. I'm just going to stick this in my bowl, and I'm going to throw a tea towel over it. You could use the plastic bags, saran wrap. I just use a towel because it's cleaner. I'm just going to give my hands a quick wash, and I'll be right back.
Matthew, as you're doing that, I'll just let folks know too, there's been a couple questions about posting the recording. Yes, we'll be posting the recording onto cartograinchain.com, hopefully within the week. We'll also have the PDF of the recipe and any other resources that we can think of to accompany this. And folks can also access links to other homeschool sessions from that website as well.
Okay, so would you go back onto the meat can? All right, so what I've done is I've begun to mix the dough. I've got everything together. We've incorporated all our ingredients. We're going to let that rest. Personally, I always use a timer because I tend to forget. It's not typically when I'm making one dough, but when you have 3, 4, 5, 6 on the go. So I'll even write it down on my recipe. I keep a booklet, and every time I make a dough, I write all the details, the temperature, the time. That's a little bit more for another advanced class, so we're not going to get too much into that. But do use a timer. It'll help you from forgetting. So what we can do now is I'm going to move on. So I want you to think, we're going to fast forward. So typically what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix this dough, and I'm going to let that rise for about an hour to an hour and a half before it goes in the fridge. When you first start out with this recipe, you can play around what works for you. Personally, I prefer to shape the dough and put the shaped dough balls in the fridge, but you can also just bulk a chunk of dough. If you're going to make a pan pizza, so I have a great pan right here. If you wanted to make a pan pizza, it's better to let the dough go overnight in the fridge and then stretch it into the pan the next day. But for today, we're just going to shape some dough balls. So this is a dough that I made earlier so that I could sort of show the shaping period, and I'm going to sort of show you how to shape it. So what I look for is that it's risen. When I put it in this container, it was barely to here, and now it's almost doubled in size. I smell it. It smells active. It's got nice fermentation, and you can see, well, you can't see it, but I can see little tiny bubbles happening. I can kind of see, I don't know if you can see that, but there's little tiny bubbles happening, and it's starting to go down. So for shaping, you can decide what works for you. I've written a standard 280 grams, which is going to make a pizza the size of my stone, and we'll talk about that later. If you want to make a pan pizza, I recommend for a 10 by 14 pan, which is standard, about 550 grams. But again, you're going to figure out what works for you. The beauty of the beginner dough is it's very versatile. You can use it how you want. If you've got kids and they're picky, maybe you want to make little 200-gram balls. What I usually do is I make 1 or 2 smaller ones so that my daughter can kind of have her own personal pizza. She can chuck some ingredients on there and great. So I'm going to take this now and I'm going to flip this onto the table. And let's go back onto our dough cam here. So I'm going to use a plastic bench scraper to cut this. This is my kitchen table, so I never use the metal bench scraper on here. And this thing is actually quite good, but you can use whatever you want. If you don't have one of these, I suggest using a knife, or even a bread knife will help you cut it. So for shaping, so you're going to have to imagine with me, we've made our dough, it's relaxed, it's risen. You know, we have this nice airy dough, which is where you're going to be soon with your doughs. And I'm just going to cut a strip off of this. So what I do is I cut it into a manageable strip, because I find if I'm trying to cut pieces off of it like that, I don't get them very even. So we're going to take a cut, and I'm going to aim for 280 grams on the scale. So I'm way off, and we'll add another one. Okay, 281. So what I always do if you add another piece is you're going to put it on top. What I don't want you to do, and I never want to see this, and in fact, this is one of the biggest things when I first started consulting in the pizza world, is a lot of people do this, is if they're short, they'll take the dough and tear a little piece off it. Now, what you've just done is all that hard work you've done by hand, you're degassing it. So in this little piece of dough, I'm going to add this onto another, and what it's going to do is create a weak spot when I stretch it. So try to always, always, always use your dough knife. I charge a lot of money for that tip, so don't be giving it out to all the pizzerias, please. That's a consulting secret, okay? So I'm going to divide these evenly. I'm not too concerned because I'm making this at home. I have this little bit of extra dough. I'm just going to divide that onto them. Again, if you have one that's like 260 grams, don't worry about getting it perfect at 280 because you really don't need it. If you're not running a business and you're just making pizzas at home, 10 grams doesn't matter. When you get into a scale, so at Maker Pizza, we make 10 to 14,000 pizzas a week, and we need those pizzas to be within 5 grams because we need it consistent across multiple locations. And we also are looking at food cost and analyzing it as a business. At home, whatever. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to move this so you can see. So I think you can see that right on the camera. It's good, right? So I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to start by stretching the dough. I'm going to pull the sides over, and I'm going to show you, I'll probably show you 3 different ways to shape. So now I have this kind of stretched thing. I'm going to take the corner and bring it up, and we're going to pinch all the corners in. So now if you look at that, I have a ball. Then you can take your hand and start to roll it on the table. So the table, if you notice, I have used 0 flour. The table is actually what's going to stretch and shape your dough ball. Okay? At the end, I'm going to take my thumb and my finger, and I'm just going to pinch this off to close the ball. Okay? So now we have a nice dough ball. There's no tearing. There's no cracks. If you find that you're starting to get tearing on your dough, it's probably a sign that you're either working it too hard or the dough has not relaxed long enough. Okay, so we're going to do another one. I'm going to show you a slightly different way. We're going to start with a little stretch. We're going to bring the sides in. Now this one, we're just going to stretch it towards us and bring it over. So you still have the same thing. Now I'm going to pick that up, and like making some fresh mozzarella with your Italian nonna, you're just going to stretch it. So the thumb pulls down, and I turn with the other hand. Okay? Turning, turning, turning. Now check it out. We have a nice dough ball. If you want to give it that round on the table, you can. And essentially, you're going to have the same thing with a slightly different. I showed two because I like people to know that there's not one way to do this. My way is not the best way. It's the way that I do it and the way I've learned. There's many, many different ways to do it. The key here is you're creating a nice, round, and tight dough ball. If the dough ball is not tight, you're going to have a very flat pizza and you're going to end up tearing your dough. So I'm just going to set these aside and we're going to go to another one. So I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I'm going to pull it towards me, flip it over, and round it on the table very quickly. So you have the same thing here, same result, again, another way. So just to go back to the very first one, because this is the most easy, we're going to take our dough ball, we're going to grab the sides, it doesn't matter where. The extra bit that I put is on the middle in the top, and you're going to stretch that dough out, okay? You're going to bring the sides in. Again, if you notice it's tearing, you're going too hard. Grab the bottom and roll it over. And then just use your hands and roll it on the table. Close the ball off, and you've got a pizza, or a pizza dough, sorry, okay? So there's 4 pizza doughs. They're a little bit different, the shaping. You know, I try to show a few ways so that everyone can kind of play around with what works best for them. The key is to make a tight ball, and at the end to close that off so you don't have a big hole here. You don't want to get that hole, you want to close it off so you can hold that in your hand. I'm just going to grab a tray. So we can talk a little bit more about the times later on. But if you're gonna cook these pizzas tonight, I just put them on a tray. I have a sill pad on here. You can buy a dough tub if you want, you know, like at the pizza place, we use a fancy dough tub. At home, I just use a tray because it's what I already have and I don't want to go out and buy a bunch of stuff. I put them like that. What I'm going to do is flip another sheet pan over top and I put a bag around it. So I'm going to just switch to a dough tray. So that I'm not jumping around too much. Dan, you want to just switch it back to me? So what I don't want to do is confuse everyone because I know we're jumping back and forth. I've just shaped this dough and I have a dough that I shaped last night. So what you would do if you're making your dough now, you're going to have your dough, we're going to finish mixing it in a bit and you're going to leave it out for an hour to 90 minutes, depending on where you are, if it's hot or whatever. Then you're going to shape it the way we did, and then you're going to stick that dough in the fridge overnight. If you wanted to use it today, I mean, it's 1 p.m., it's a bit earlier, you could just leave it out on the counter and it'll be ready for dinner. Personally, I prefer overnight, but whatever. So just imagine with me, 24 hours have elapsed, and we're going to pull out this dough in 24 hours, and I'm going to show you what it looks like, okay? Set this aside. So this is my little setup at home. The reason I put the tray over top is so that in my fridge I can put things on top. I don't have a dedicated dough fridge, and it's quite the dance to get everything done in there. And then I'll just reuse this bag. I really should invest in a dough tub, but at this time I'm not going to. So if you can see here, maybe let's go back to the, sorry to jump around on you, Dan, but let's go back to the overhead so that we can see the difference between after. So this is the exact same dough, exact same formula. The difference is that this has been resting shape overnight. So I actually shaped these at about midnight last night. So it hasn't been quite 24 hours. And I pulled them out about 4 hours ago so they have time to come to room temperature. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set my other dough that I just made. We're going to set this one aside, and then I'm going to show you how I shape a pizza. So is everyone following along with me so far? We're doing good. Everyone's happy. This is all right. Keep going.
Looks great.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to stretch a pizza. And now there's many ways to stretch a pizza. You know, there's a lot of ways to do it. I'm going to show you a very basic sort of introduction to pizza making. This is not how I typically do my wood oven pizzas or at the pizzeria. but I want everyone to be comfortable with the dough first. So we're gonna put a little bit of flour on it. We're gonna take our scraper and we're gonna flip that into our hand. So now you have a wet side, and remember what the bottom is, the tray on the bottom. And I'm just gonna dunk that right in the flour, okay? I'll set this aside just so it's not confusing. And I have now a dough that's covered in flour. The side that was down on the tray, we want that to be down on the stone, because what's gonna happen is we're gonna get a better crust when this has a slight skin on it. So to make this really simple, the first one, we're just gonna start to press this out like a focaccia, okay? So now you're already starting to create that round shape. Press that out. You can give it a little slap in your hands. For it to be VPN certified, Napoli style pizza, you can only stretch it like this and on the table. But what we're gonna do is we're just gonna pick this dough up and we're gonna hold it here. So my hand is on the corner of the dough, and I'm just gonna go around the dough. And what that's gonna do is the gravity is gonna stretch this out for us. So that natural gravity, we're stretching. And now can you see, I've already got sort of a round pizza. If you want, you can sort of spin it around on your hands a little bit. Don't use your fingertips because you'll tear through it. You can see I use the back of my hand like this, and we're just gonna let it roll around. And keep in mind, this is a very simple way to do this. I just wanna get everyone started on the right track. Use a little bit of flour on the table and put it down. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go around and I'm gonna start to make a little border. So in the pizzeria, we actually go around and we crimp a border so that we have that nice border. For today, we're just gonna leave it at that. This is a 101. You know, this is our first day. We're gonna make some beautiful pizzas. Everyone's gonna love it. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but I've got lots of brown specks in mine, and that's all the fresh milled spelt that we're using today. And we'll talk a little bit more about the flours after. There's no need to let it rest and stretch it again. I see a lot of people saying to do that. I don't think that's necessary. I think that's, a lot of people take bread making when they make pizza. So there's a lot of people that are bread bakers and they want to make great pizza, and they take all the fundamentals of bread baking to pizza, but separate them right now in your brain. There's bread and there's pizza. While there's many techniques and fundamentals that go across both, it is not the same thing. So I've got this pizza peel here, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a little bit of flour on here. If you want, some people use cornmeal, some people use semolina. I typically use 50-50 fine semolina. What I absolutely hate personally, and this is your pizza, so you can do this if you want, I hate coarse cornmeal and I hate semolina because I don't like the texture, and I find that it burns in the oven. A lot of people do that. I also find a lot of people, once they've shaped their dough, they like to cover it in flour for some silly reason. That makes no sense to me, and I think it's a waste of flour. It's also not going to produce the best dough. Again, that's just my opinion, so if that's what your Italian grandmother's done, you know, please don't send her chasing after me. You can see that makes a pretty nice sized pizza. And so what I'm going to do for the first pizza, and what I recommend you do at home, is we're just going to put some olive oil. We're going to brush that around. So I want to see, how is my dough? How is my oven? What's my setup? Did this work? Is this Chef Duffy guy crazy? Does this thing even work? I don't know. And I always like to cook a pizza with nothing, especially if I'm in a new oven. When I do consulting jobs for pizzerias, I always go in and I cook a dough with nothing. And they always think it's crazy, but I like to see how the dough is. At this point, if you want to make it round, you can kind of stretch it out. You can see it's got nice bubbles all over it. Look at it, it's super happy. It's bubbling up on the crust. We're going to take a little bit of cracked pepper. And I'm going to put a little bit of salt on here, some flaky salt. Okay. And a little more oil. And now I'm going to take this dough cam off, and we're going to head into my kitchen, and I'm going to show you my little pizza setup. So bear with me for one moment. You think you can cook? Okay, so I'm just gonna pass this over to my wife in a second so that we can get this going. Battery was kind of dying, so you're gonna have to hold both.
Do I have to angle the camera?
Just look at the thing. Just look. That's me. Yeah. Is it?
Yep.
So we're gonna come into my kitchen. Come on. So before I actually cook the pizza, I'm gonna show you how I set my oven up. One really, really important thing is once you put the toppings on the pizza, you do not have infinite time. Only top what you can cook at once. So don't top 10 pizzas and let them sit out. What's gonna happen is the dough is gonna start to stick to the peel. So I only top what I'm cooking. Take your pizza, make sure that it slides on the table, on the peel before you go to the oven. If you don't have a peel, you could use a cutting board. It's a little bit harder to slide off. You could use an upside down sheet pan, and that will work. And now we're gonna show you how I've set my oven up. So I have my oven on full temperature. It's at 550 degrees, and I let it rip. And this has been going for at least an hour. I recommend you let it preheat for an hour. Mine's been on for an hour and a half. But just try to give it that hour, because what you're trying to do is the stones or whatever you're cooking on, you want to saturate the heat and build a thermal mass. Pizza hits it, the heat's going to go in, and then it's going to start to rise. If you think about a wood-fired pizza, they're cooking in a crazy hot oven in about 90 seconds. In order to be VPN Napoli-style pizza, you have to hit a certain time, and it cannot spend over that time in the oven. So I'm going to show you now. We're going to take a look. So I'm a little bit fortunate, and I have a wood-burning pizza oven in the backyard. So I took the stones out of my wood-burning pizza oven, and I also have a baking steel. Now, you don't need both of these things, and if you don't have either of those, you can just slide it on. A cast iron pan works very well. You could also stretch this dough, put it into a lightly oiled cast iron pan, and stick that in the oven. The reason I have two is because when the pizza hits, the temperature is going to go down on the stone. So I have two so I can move them in between. It also is going to help me crank the pizzas out. So on the very top, it's a baking steel. On the bottom, it's the stone. I have a link in the recipe. There's a company called California Pizza Stones. You can order a stone for your oven. You can also go to Baking Steel, send them a message, tell them I sent you because it looks good for me, and you can grab one of those. But again, when you first start, you don't need it. This dough will look great in the pan. It works fine. If you can see above me, I have a number of cast iron pans, and a skillet pizza is a great way to start. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open that oven. Again, make sure it slides. What you don't want to do is shoot the pizza in the oven. You want to put the peel in and slide the pizza off, okay? So look at how beautiful that dough looks right now. Look at all those bubbles. It is going. We're going to close the door, and I'm going to switch this now to broil on high. And what that's going to do is it's going to, sorry, one second, my timer. So what that's going to do is it's going to start. So we have it on broil. So the stones are saturated with heat. They're going to stay hot, even though the oven's not heating up from the bottom. So the pizza's going to cook, and it's going to start to rise on that stone. At the very end, I'm going to flip it to the top on broil to get that top down heat. If you don't have two stones, you can do one stone on the very top, and before you fire the pizza, you'll switch it to broil. And I'll show you that on the next one. So my timer's just gone off. We're going to go take a look at our dough we mixed before, and we're going to finish mixing it. If you're unsure, you can set a timer. One thing I will tell you is everybody's oven is a little bit different. So what you're going to have to do is start with a timer, and you're going to have to figure out what works for you. In the recipe that I send you, it is a guideline. It says 6 to 8 minutes, but do keep in mind this is a guideline. So I'm going to go back to my dough that's been resting. And you can see now, look at how relaxed that is. If I pick it up, it's very smooth. And we're just going to continue on with what we were doing before. So we're going to bring this over, and we're going to start to knead our dough.
You're going to switch? You're going to switch back to that one?
You could switch. Yeah, it's okay. Unless you need to. You okay for a minute?
Yeah.
So my wife is holding the camera. She's working from home. Don't tell her boss. But she's just going to hold the camera because we're going to go back into the kitchen in a second. So don't bear with me. There's no overhead camera right now. So you're going to see now, take a look at that. It is a nice dough ball. Another way you can knead this is you can take it and you can fold this in half. Turn it, fold it. Turn it, fold it. If you have kids, this is a great thing you can get your kids to do. Keep them busy. And either of these techniques will work. What you're keeping in mind is the tension you're building on the dough. Look at that spring back. Beautiful. I'm going to round this up. And so now what we're going to do is I'm going to let this dough rise for 1 hour. Halfway through that 1 hour, I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to give it that turn in my hand. So you won't see that with me, but what I'll do is I'll put it in the bowl. I'm going to put a lid on the bowl. I'm going to let that rise for an hour. After 1 hour, I'll stick it in here and I'll put that in the fridge, or I'll shape my dough balls and we'll put the dough balls in the fridge. So it's really up to you, whatever works for your schedule. Keep in mind, this is a beginner pizza, whatever you want. If you really were pressed for time, I know there's people with job schedules, whatever, stick it in here, put that in the fridge, deal with it later. That's totally fine. So I'm going to leave it here. I'm going to set my timer for 1 hour. We're going to put this on top, and then we're going to go check our dough, and then we're going to actually make what I like to call a real pizza, and we're going to start very simple. Actually, before we check that dough, I'm going to stretch this out real quick just because I know that it's not ready. Throw this in here. So again, another way we can do this is by starting to press a ring, or what's called pounding the dough. So by doing that, we're going to eliminate those large gas bubbles. And now don't worry, because this is something that, you know, it's going to work its way out. If you're spin it, whatever, you can spin it around, get fancy with it, let your neighbors see, you toss it up in the air. My daughter loves this one. She always asks me to throw them up in the air. So when I do this, I'm going to pull my hands out and I'm going to let gravity do the work. And just within a couple turns, you can see I've already created that pizza dough and a round dough. So holding here, we're going to turn that and let the dough stretch itself. I'm doing the same thing when I hold it here. I have the bottoms of my hands, and when I throw it up, gravity is going to stretch it. So take a look. For everyone out here that's new to this, because I know there's a lot of different levels, put your dough and just dimple it like a focaccia. That's all you need. I have 2 pizza peels because I'm obsessed with making pizza. So I'm going to just throw this one up on another peel. We're going to let this sit for a minute because I don't want to dress it. Remember, we don't like this to sit dressed. And we're going to go take a look at our pizza in the oven. We're going to pull that out. We're going to fire the next pizza. Then we'll do some Q&A, okay? So come on with me. I like to use this thing here. It's a pizza spinner. If you don't have one, you can just use your peel. You could also, if you're daring, just reach your hand in and spin it. But I'm going to show you how I spin this. Everyone's oven's different, so temperatures may vary. We're just going to get underneath that pizza. I'm going to pick up half of it, and I'm going to spin it around. We're going to look at the bottom. So the bottom looks nice. And we're just going to finish it on top under broil. So what that's going to do is we're going to get those spots that we want. When we talk really serious about pizza, we want what's called leoparding, which is caused by the CO2 trapped in the dough. It rises and it burns. Typically, home ovens aren't quite hot enough to get that leoparding, but this is pretty good. We're still doing pretty good here. There we go. I'm going to take that out now. Do not let it burn. It only takes a few seconds under broil. I'm going to pull this up here. I'm going to remember to turn my oven back on bake for the next pizza. I'm going to crank that on full. If you're not going to eat your pizzas all at once, I recommend use a tray and just stick that dough on the tray so that it doesn't steam on the bottom. Typically what we do is we'll make it on a plate. So you can see the bottom's got some nice specks. The top is killer. Like, this is actually killer. This is, to be honest, this is my first day making pizza, and I just got lucky. I grabbed this recipe, you know, I want it off the back of a yeast package. I was a little bit nervous, but I hope that works. If you want with this, what is a nice touch, because this is just sort of a flatbread that we're doing now, we're going to take our oil and we're just going to brush it lightly around the crust. I like that olive oil. I like that taste. You know, beautiful, wonderful. So I'm going to leave this here. Oh, I just stepped on my dog. Don't call animal services. It was an accident. I promise. He's actually my buddy. So I've got this, my next pizza. I'm gonna, just because it's been sitting for a minute, I'm just gonna stretch it a little bit. And now we're gonna dress a real pizza. So I'm gonna take a little bit of sauce. We'll talk about the sauce in a minute. You can use whatever you want. For me, I use this right here. It's called Bianco di Napoli. This is my all-time favorite pizza. I don't care. Sorry to all you Italians that are watching. This is not San Marzano. This is product of California. In my opinion, it is the best, and I will never go back to San Marzano's. They did not pay me to say that either, but I have tried about 100 different tomatoes, and that's by far the best. If you see that you have a weak spot, which I do here, I'm going to avoid putting the tomato there. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a little bit of tomato on. We're going to spin this around. Okay. We're going to just avoid that spot. I typically don't go right to the edge. I like that border, and we're just going to avoid that little spot there. And what I'll do now is I'll just put a light amount. I'm using Fiori di Latte here and a little bit of Parmigiano. We're going to hit this with a little bit of Parm. I'm just going to tear this onto it. There's a lot of debate that's going to happen right now. I'm sure I'm going to upset somebody in the room. Somebody's going to leave the webinar, but I'm going to put the basil on now. If you do this and you post a picture of it, 1,000 Italians will come on your Instagram and say, oh my God, my mother is whatever, and you're a crazy Canadian. But you know what? I'm going to do it because the best pizza doesn't come from Italy anymore. Okay, we're going to put that on. I like to use these cup and char pepperonis. So these are going to cup up. We're going to put a couple of those on here. Boom, boom. Look at that. We're going to hit it with a touch of olive oil, not too much because there's going to be a lot of fat from the pep. And we're going to hit a little flaky salt, and I try to just hit the little mozzarellas. You can try, if you want, we're going to brush oil on half of the crust, so I'll show you the difference between the two. So we're going to do half the crust like that. And now we're going to go back to our oven. Remember, really important, make sure it slides, and we're going to fire this in the oven. I'm a very, very, very firm believer of less is more on a pizza. When I worked for Daniel Boulud, his corporate chef, we were making pizzas. The room service of the Four Seasons Hotel where we opened our restaurant said, hey, I'll make you a pizza. And he put a layer of toppings bigger than the dough. The corporate chef from Daniel, who's Italian, he took one bite, threw it in the garbage and said, why in America do you have to put so much toppings on the pizza? And that will forever stay in my mind. If you have good ingredients, good dough, you don't need a ton of bullshit on your pizza. But that said, it's your pizza and you can put whatever you want on it. Okay, we're gonna do this again, and I'm just gonna slide this off onto the bottom stone. Boom. If you hang over a bit, don't worry about it. So now what we'll do is I'm gonna come back over, and we're gonna switch back to we'll switch back to the other camera. We can do some questions right now while we wait for this last pizza to cook. And then in a few minutes, we'll cut open our other dough as well, and we'll take a look at our first pizza. Or I guess if you want, we'll do that first because it's easier. So you can use a pizza wheel for this.
Can you switch over?
You want it, Dan? You want to switch it back to the main camera, and then we'll jump into Q&A soon. Can you just pick here? So we've got our pizza dough here, our crust. I'm just gonna cut this in half, and we're gonna take a look at this. Come right over, actually, closer to the computer. We're going to take a look. We're going to just look at what we've done here. So can you see it's nice and open inside? We've got a nice, beautiful crust. It goes all the way through the pizza. It's firm on the bottom. I can hold it. It doesn't slop down. And we got a beautiful crumb. You can slice a little slice off of this one. And we're going to take a look here. So this is a very good sign that we've done our job right. The dough feels light, light, light. We've got that huge pocket of air in there. Oh my goodness, look at that. So while our last pizza's in the oven, we can jump into a Q&A, and then I'll just pause and grab the pizza out of the oven.
Sounds great, Matthew. And we have many questions, so I think too, we'll try to get a lot of those answered after the class and get those published. I think the first question, to make sure we don't miss, was a question about the name of the website. So the name of Colorado Grain Chain's website is simply coloradograinchain.com. But would love to hear, Matthew, what your website is named. And you might be muted. We might be able to, we could switch back maybe.
Can you still hear me now?
Oh, there we go. No, that's perfect. So the website you're going to launch here in the next couple weeks, what's the name of that?
So the website's matthewjamesduffy.com or .ca. They'll both take you to the same place. Right now, there's a landing page and there's a sign up. So basically what we've done, we've been working very hard at putting together some resources. When the site actually launches, it's not going to be full of thousands of recipes, but what we are going to do is update it regularly. So I've been working on a sourdough guide, a little pizza guide. I'm going to have information about workshops such as this, and I'm going to put my favorite stuff. So one of the things I found is I get asked almost every day, what book do you recommend for pizza? What book do you recommend for bread? What scraper do you use? I love answering and I love helping people, but it's gotten to the point where I can't answer everyone's questions. So one of the main reasons for the website is to put it on the website. I haven't fully announced this publicly yet, but we've also begun to develop several online courses, one of them being a masterclass, and I won't go too much into details on the topic, but let's just say it's pizza. And it's something that I'm going to be offering a discount for any of the subscribers on the site. So we're going to put together a masterclass, some of the things that I've learned over the years to save you time, and for everyone that subscribes to the site before. Yoshi, sorry, my dog's trying to eat the stuff off the table. We're going to give a bit of a discount. So we're going to have a blog with some recipe entries, stuff about our online courses, a bio about me, and a link for any consulting. So it'll have some of my industry partners, Maker Pizza, and a few other people that I've worked with. And then we have a few other surprises, but if I give it all to you now, you won't join it.
That sounds great. And this has been an amazing hour. I've worked in a lot of pizza joints over the years, and neat to see it all in front of us here. And I will say too, on the questions, there has been some discussion based on the merits of Neapolitan pizza. So you may have there's definitely some difference of opinions out there, but I think that's a good thing. So Matthew, would you like me to switch back to that other screen, or were you just checking the pizza?
Pizza in the oven.
Okay. I guess one question, particularly for folks here in Colorado, is just advice for high altitude adjustments or anything that you have, any thoughts you have on that?
So that's a great question to start. So, I mean, I'm not too familiar. I've never been to Colorado before, and it's not something I've baked in that environment. But what I would suggest is start with a base recipe, take notes, and adjust from there. So, I mean, I think a common misconception, and people think that hey, I live in a humid environment, should I adjust the hydration? Well, it's not so much the flour is absorbing the water out of the air, it's that humid environment is going to speed up fermentation. So you can decrease the yeast or increase the yeast. So what you'll do is you're going to start with this base recipe. You're going to take some notes. Hey, I think it was a little bit sluggish. So maybe increase the yeast or increase the fermentation time. And that's sort of where I would start with. I would write everything down always.
Okay, great. And speaking of any adjustments, do you have any advice on, if you have an outdoor pizza oven, doing anything differently?
Yeah, 100%. So I use a wood burning oven. I have an Alpha 4 pizza. I also have a Statler made oven. A little shameless plug here. I'm offering a 10% discount on the Statlers right now. So if anyone's interested, hit me up. But what I do is I decrease the hydration. So when you're cooking pizza, it takes a certain amount of time to cook. The longer that the pizza cooks, the more water evaporates from the pizza. So if you're going to cook a very fast pizza, you're going to want to scale this hydration down to about 62%. So in your recipe, instead of 650, you're going to start with 620. That can depend on the flour, but typically you're just going to change the hydration and everything else will stay the same.
Wonderful.
Just bear with me. I just have to check my pizza, but I can still hear you if you want to keep asking questions.
All right. I figured I'd camera 1, camera 2. This is like a Wayne's World episode. I like it. Yeah, first question on the list too is what's the most ideal time to let your fresh dough sit on the counter before portioning and making dough balls?
So, sorry, can you read that one more time?
The most ideal time, how long do you let your fresh dough sit on the counter before portioning or making dough balls?
So it depends on the dough. For this recipe that we're making now, I wrote some directions in the actual recipe that everyone's going to receive, but I would go somewhere between 60 to 90 minutes. Otherwise, what I would do is I would put that in the fridge overnight. So you let your dough rise for an hour and a half, throw it in the fridge, and then the next day, about 4 hours before you want to make the pizza, pull it out, ball it, and let it sit out. So it can be either one, and this dough is super versatile, so either one will work. I'm just going to pull my pizza out and go back to the stage. Actually, I like it a little bit darker than that. So just to recap that, you're going to wait about 90 minutes after you made the dough. Then you're going to ball it and put it in the fridge. Or you're going to put the entire dough in the fridge and pull that out the next day, about 4 hours before you want to make your pizza.
So there's a number of questions about the kinds of flour, and I know we mentioned talking about that more. So yeah, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, of course. So I'm just going to set this pizza down. So I've got, some spotting on the side. I could let this go a little bit darker, but I want to answer your questions. I like to really cook them, but you can see that it's nice and holds up. Beautiful. And we've got a nice puffy crust. But I'm going to leave that just so that I don't burn it. And then what I'm going to do, because my phone's actually dying, is maybe I'm going to just leave on this camera and use the audio on my microphone. So just let me know if you can hear me now.
Yeah, that's great.
So I'm going to sit down. Okay, so on to the topic of, can you pull that forward? And then just tilt the computer a little bit towards me. Yeah, that's perfect. So on the topic of flour, typically what I do for my pizza is I start with bread flour and then I make additions. I always put whole grains into my doughs, no matter what I'm making, and I always do at least 10%. So what I'll do is I'll remove 100 grams of bread flour and add 100 grams of spelt. For this dough, I did 200. The difference between Dopo Zero and bread flour is going to be covered in my next class, so I won't go too much into it. You can use either one. Dopo Zero is typically a flour where they extract a certain part of the endosperm. So in flour, you have a germ, a bran, an endosperm, and you have a hull. In the endosperm is what makes white flour. So an Osteoroller Mill is 2 rollers. The grain goes through it, removes the outer layer. As it goes through and filters down, it continues to remove. What they do with Double Zero is it's basically a flour that's developed in a lab. The company says, hey, we want exactly 12.8% protein. They go on the computer, they pinpoint the exact part of the grain, they extract, and they take the mill. I find bread flour has a better enzymatic activity, and I get better fermentation with bread flour. So I like to combine the two. I also find when I use 100% Dopo Zero, I don't like the texture of the bread, of the pizza. I have also found that the flour in the US is very different from the flour in Canada, and what I use as a bread flour might not work exactly the same. So when I make recipes from the UK, they typically don't work for me because their flour is very soft. I found US is closer to Canada, but you sort of have to play around what you have. I would aim between that sort of 12 to 14% protein, and typically pizza flours are on the higher end of that, and just sort of figure out what works for you. I think start with the base recipe of 1,000 and then scale from there. If you really, really want to start with Double Zero and you're not sure, make 2 doughs side by side, take a look at them, figure out what works best for you in your home kitchen or your pizzeria.
Wonderful. Well, unfortunately, I think we are through our lunch hour. But there's a good number of questions. So we'd love to follow up with you and see if maybe we can get some of those others answered that folks
sure,
can.
let's do two more, and I'll be quick about the answers.
Okay, sure.
Pick two random. We'll do two more, and then what I can do is we can do a follow up, or when you post, if people want to ask their questions on your YouTube video, I can go into the YouTube and answer them there, and maybe that works because that way everyone can see them.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, let's I'll combine one here and make it as complicated as possible. Perfect. Here. So pros and cons for using instant dry yeast versus active dry yeast. And then there's also questions around, using sourdough when the right time to feed your starter is, as far as being able to use that. So maybe just kind of a 11 question there.
No, great question. So I typically use active dry yeast because it's accessible, and I don't cook with a lot of yeast at home. So I don't keep fresh yeast because it doesn't have a very good shelf life. It's also harder to find in Toronto. In the bakery traditionally and in the pizzeria, I've always used fresh yeast, but at home I use active dry. I choose active dry because you don't have to activate it. You don't have to stir it in. You don't have to let it sit. I mean, you saw my dough. I put it in the water. I mix it. If you are just using a dry yeast, you're going to want to use warmer water, and you're going to want to put it into the water and let it start to rise. So it'll be anywhere from 5 to 6 minutes. The problem with that for me is now you're using warm water, and that goes against our slow fermentation and our nice rise on our dough. For naturally leavened, almost all of the pizzas I make at home, if anyone follows me on social, you'll see all my pizzas. I always do naturally leavened. There's something about the process for it, and there's a lot of ways to do it, but personally I use active starter, meaning I don't use sourdough discard. I don't use old starter. Yes, that works. Yes, that can be a great way to use your discard, but I'm a pizza obsessed person. I want to make a proper best pizza, and I want to have a long, slow fermentation. So for naturally leavened pizzas, I use a starter that's at its peak. I use a 50-50 whole wheat to bread flour starter. And I would start with a lower inoculation. So if you wanted to make this dough, for example, you could use 5% levain of overall formula, meaning 50 grams, and leave the dough out overnight and mix it tonight and leave it out on the counter for tomorrow. If you want to speed that up again, you can go up to about 20, and you're going to rise a bit quicker, and then do your rest of your ferment in the fridge. I am working on some sourdough pizza resources, so I don't want to go too much into it because I want to keep this as a beginner class, but that's where I would start. I would start with, if you want to do a cold ferment, start with 20%. So if you're looking at my recipe, you have 1,000 grams of flour, you're going to remove that yeast, and you're going to add 200 grams of levain. Do keep in mind that's going to change the water, so you'll need to decrease the water a little bit in the recipe. So if your recipe, if you're using 200 grams of starter, you're probably going to want to remove about 75 grams of water because your hydration is going to kick up on that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's great. And then
it's a little bit of a teaser. If you want more information, you have to follow along and subscribe.
Right. It's a lifelong pursuit. No, this is wonderful. I guess final question about if you're going to use like a cast iron skillet, and you're using a skillet that is maybe not large enough to be able to set that pie in the oven, would you preheat that skillet and pull it out and set the?
So that's a really good question. So there's two things you can do. If you have a smaller skillet, you'll make smaller dough balls, 230, 240 grams. If you have a large skillet, you can stretch the dough, put it in a cold skillet, and put it in the oven. It might take a little bit longer, but it works. You can also, and this is what I've done many times in the past and what I used to do, flip the skillet upside down and use the upside down base of the skillet like your pizza stone. So I actually have one right here. So if you put this in the oven like that, and you're cooking on here, you're gonna still get that thermal mass. Otherwise, just put your dough inside the skillet and stick it in the oven. It's still gonna work really great. It's still gonna get the heat, and it's still gonna make a great pizza for you.
Well, that's great advice. Thank you. And just in general, thank you so much. It was a really informative hour and exciting to see everything you're doing. And
Amazing.
definitely looking forward to checking out MatthewJamesDuffy.com or .ca when that's live. And
I bought them both so that it would go to this, so it would funnel it all together. Yeah, I mean, if anyone has any, immediate questions, I try to get to all my Instagram messages. It's hard because I do get, literally I can get over 100 in a day, sometimes 200 depending on what I'm doing. I try to answer them all. If you really need something, you can always hit me up there. And that's a good way to sort of communicate. Tag me in your pizza pictures. I love seeing what people are doing. I actually had someone message me yesterday and say, hey, would you be offended if I tagged you in my picture? The answer is no. I love when people tag me. I want to see, especially when you're making my recipe, because I need to know that it works. Do I need to make adjustments? This is one that I made that's supposed to be very versatile, can be used in many ways. And this recipe is an introduction. So I want to see, hey, how are people making out with that recipe? How are they doing? So please do the tag. And yeah, give me a follow. The biggest thing you can do to support me is when you see a picture, leave a comment, like it, and share it with a friend. Send it to a friend because that helps me grow and that helps other people find me.
Great. And yeah, hopefully you'll get some feedback too on some high altitude pizza baking too. So
yeah, well, even better. I'm hoping. So had it not been for this current situation, I was planning on coming out to visit David at Raleigh Street Bakery. So hopefully at some point I'll make my way out there because I've always wanted to visit Colorado or the Rockies anyways.
We'd love to have you. And yeah, thank you again. And for folks, this video as well as recipe and other, ideally some of these answered questions and other resources will be on coloradograinchain.com. And appreciate it again. Thank you so much, Matthew. And have a great one and take care.
Hey, thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate all your support. Everyone that's here, you're awesome. I love it. I love baking with you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I would not be doing this if it wasn't for all the people that joined. I actually thought we'd have about 4 people, and we had over 300 people register. So thank you so much. Thank you.
We really appreciate it. All right. Have a great day. Thank you.